At brunch, my daughter-in-law said, "We've decided not to invite you for Christmas." I just nodded. My name is Mary Beth Ellison, 71 years old. I live alone in Briarwood Hollow, a quiet little town where the snow falls thicker than memory. If you're listening to this on a cold evening in a kitchen filled only with the ticking of a clock and a teapot that's just run dry, then maybe we're not that far apart. I used to be called Mom, Grandma, the woman who never forgot a single birthday, who showed up for every holiday. But this year, for the first time, I wasn't invited to Christmas. Not because I did something wrong, just because maybe I'd been around too long enough to become part of the background no one notices anymore. I'm not telling this story to complain. I'm telling it because maybe somewhere out there there's someone else who's waited for a call that never came, an empty chair at the table, a gift left unopened, and a mother who once thought, if I'm good enough, they'll still need me. If that's you, stay with me a while. I'll tell you about the winters I've made it through, and how I learned one of the simplest, hardest lessons of all: to save a seat for myself. That winter, it all began on a cold Sunday morning at the cafe I always went to when I overheard the sentence that changed everything. "We've talked it over. You won't be coming for Christmas this year." Hallie said it plainly. I nodded, as if it wasn't even worth setting my coffee down for. Fern and Hearth looked just like it always did on the Sunday before Christmas, just busy enough, cozy in that careful kind of way. Red brick walls, dressed in dried wreaths, tiny string lights glowing faintly, more decorative than warm. The chairs were still upholstered in that soft cream leather edges, a bit worn, but always clean. I picked my usual spot by the window, where I could see the town's Christmas tree in front of the post office, still just 2 faded ribbons and a dull silver star, like every year. I got there early and ordered a cappuccino, same as always. Ellie, the young waitress with the dimple on her left cheek, didn't need to ask. "Still going with the strawberry muffin, ma'am?" She smiled, setting the tray down like I was a fixture on her shift. I nodded. "Thank you, dear." Her smile was the only thing that made me feel like I hadn't completely disappeared on mornings like this. Hallie showed up first, always on time, as precise as a minute hand. Travis followed a bit slow, like he hadn't fully stepped out of last night. He sat before even unwrapping his scarf. Hallie pulled her chair out with intent, back straight, beige, turtleneck hands, resting on the menu she never actually looked at. I didn't bother asking how anyone was. These kinds of mornings weren't meant for catching up, just arriving, ordering, announcing, and leaving. Hallie didn't wait for the drinks to land. She said it without hesitation. "We've talked it over. You won't be coming for Christmas this year." I nodded again, as if I'd already said it to myself before she did. Travis glanced at me once, then stared down at the table. Hallie kept going like she needed to finish the explanation to make it official. "Becca's at that age where she needs more privacy. We thought we'd try something simpler this year, just us and the kids. Jonah's still young, so he won't notice. But Becca..." I nodded again, not in agreement, just to end the sentence. No one touched my muffin. It sat there still warm beside a cappuccino, already half gone. I stood up. "I assume I'll be paying for myself." I pulled out my wallet and placed the exact change beside the plate, careful not to let a single coin slip. Ellie returned just then, carrying a tray of tiny gingerbread cookies. "For you to take home, they're homemade," she said. I looked at her. This time, I didn't nod. "I don't need it. Thank you." No one stopped me. No one reached out. No awkward glances. I left the cafe like someone stepping out of a play that had no more lines for them. And I wasn't finished with this chapter. I had only just begun. The air outside was so cold, it stung my skin. The sidewalk had already been salted, but patches of dull gray ice still shimmered underfoot, like wounds that hadn't quite healed. I walked slowly, not because my legs were weak, but because there was nothing to rush toward. People brushed past with purpose. Everyone seemed on their way, somewhere warm, the post office, the bakery, maybe just back home. Not me. I walked toward the hill where my car was parked. I hadn't walked this stretch in December for 12 years, not since Becca was in preschool, and I'd pick her up twice a week. Back then, Hallie had seemed grateful. She used to call me the one who kept tradition alive. I still remember her handing me a thermos of cocoa once and saying, "Thanks for coming early, Mom." Well, I came early today too, only this time no one needed me. They came to make a decision. I came to receive it. At the corner was the used bookstore I used to take Travis to when he was in 3rd grade. He had stared at the ceiling map so long, I had to come back and buy it. Now, taped to the front window, 60% off, moving soon. Everything's pulling away from the places I once called mine. I stopped and looked inside. Not because I needed a book, but because I needed a reason not to keep walking. Something inside me had split a thread that once tied me to the image of the mother, the grandmother who always showed up. It had snapped, and no one even looked back. There's something strange about realizing your presence no longer fits into anyone's plans. It doesn't hurt sharply. It's just hollow, like stepping into a familiar room where everything's still in place except you. I reached into my bag and pulled out my keys. My hands trembled slightly, not from age, but from the blood in me still trying to find its rhythm after Hallie's coldness. She didn't yell. She didn't insult me. She just didn't invite me for Christmas. And somehow, that was enough to change the season entirely. Travis didn't defend me. He just sat there like a chair that had always belonged to that corner. Maybe he thought silence was keeping the peace. Maybe he thought I was too strong to be hurt. No one stopped to wonder if I had feelings of my own. I've always been the one to give up my seat, to cut the cake with more frosting, to roast the turkey without onions because Hallie's allergic. I was always the easy one, until they decided I didn't need to be considered at all. I heard the wind chime from behind me, someone opening the cafe door. The smell of cinnamon rolls drifted out. I didn't turn back. I didn't walk in. And in that moment, as I stood by my car, one sentence came to me clear, as if someone had whispered it in my ear. No one remembers I was the one who built the first home they ever lived in. On the icy curb, I walked slowly. Not because my legs were tired, but because nothing waited for me on the other side. I returned home to a quiet apartment where the floorboards creaked and the gift box on the attic shelf still waited to be opened, as if this year would be no different than the last. That box, through all those winters, had become part of a ritual I'd never thought to question. I was never formally invited to Christmas. Not once. But every year, I prepared gifts a month in advance. No one ever said, "Mom, we'd love for you to come." No one asked, "What dish would you like for the holiday dinner?" Still, I made a list. Year after year, each gift was carefully wrapped in snow-patterned paper, tied with silver or red ribbons, depending on my mood. Becca liked soft packages, so I picked scarves. Jonah loved Legos. I searched high and low for the police set he wanted. Hallie always got something for the kitchen, maybe a juicer, maybe a set of mugs with laser-etched names. As for Travis, he rarely opened his gift in front of me, but every year I left him a dark wool scarf with a Home Depot gift card tucked in a separate envelope. No one ever said thank you, but I didn't wait for it. Back then I thought, if I remembered someone, that was enough. I never thought about being invited. I just believed I was supposed to be there. Every year, at the start of December, I'd reach for the attic ladder, step by step, to pull down the Christmas box, even if I knew I might not use anything inside. Maybe I'd grown used to preparing, as if not doing so would make it even easier for them to forget I existed. I opened the box. Faded newspaper wrapped each ornament. Some had lost their shimmer. Some had tiny cracks, like time had brushed them gently on its way through. I wiped them down with a dry cloth. The scent of dried pine, from the sprigs buried at the bottom, drifted up, bringing back older winters. When I lived with Travis's father, we used to get a real tree taller than 6 feet. Every morning, sap would puddle on the floor beneath it. Back then, Hallie called me the keeper of the season. The year Travis lost his construction job, I didn't ask questions. I just called the bank and transferred $5,000 into his account. No name, no message, and it was never mentioned again. But I knew it helped That same month, Becca had new shoes, and Travis didn't have to deliver at night anymore. When Hallie had Jonah, she came home for 3 days before calling me. "Could you maybe cook something for us?" I made oatmeal with mashed apples and dropped it off every evening, left it in the fridge, never stepped inside. They said they needed space. I nodded. I've lived with those nods for so long, I can't remember the last time someone asked me if I wanted anything. I think I was programmed to stay just on the edge as long as I didn't take up too much room. That afternoon, I walked to Page and Pine, the bookstore, hoping to find something to gift Becca. She once wrote me a little card when she was 6. "Grandma, don't forget the peppermint candy." I love it. I kept that card in my wallet for nearly 2 years. Now, I'm not sure she even remembers what peppermint smells like. The shop was quiet. That mix of pine wood and fresh paper in the air. There was a tiny bell hanging on the window, the kind of sound that makes you feel like nothing in the world needs to hurry. Evelyn, the owner, still wore that oversized scarf. Her eyes squinted into a smile when she saw me. "Looking for a gift for your grandkids again?" "Miss Mary Beth?" I nodded, then stopped. "No, not today." I hadn't picked anything yet. I stood quietly for a while, scanning the children's section. Hardcover books lined up reindeer, Santa gingerbread men, all in neat rows. There was one I used to read to Travis nearly 40 years ago, The Night Before Christmas. I don't remember much of the story, just that he used to yawn when I got to the flying reindeer part. He liked real things. I, on the other hand, wanted to hold on to whatever magic winter had left. Evelyn handed me a cup of tea, tilted her head. "You know we're looking for a storyteller on Saturday mornings. The kids come in pajamas, sit under the tree. It's a joy." I smiled faintly. "You think I could be a storyteller? You're the most natural one." "I know," she said, without missing a beat. "The way you speak, slow and soft, makes people want to listen." I didn't answer. Just reached for a book with a deep blue cover. Reading stories to children. That's something I used to do every night all those early years of being a mother. But no one ever asked me to do it, outside of family. I sat down on the cushioned bench by the window. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, light, soft, silent. Inside, the sound of pages turning and a faint chime became a gentle backdrop. And I realized there is a world where I don't have to earn my place with gifts, silence, or sacrifice. It's just, I'd never dared to step into it. When I left the shop, I carried nothing. Evelyn handed me a card with the storytelling schedule. I slipped it into my coat pocket. No promises, no refusals. I walked home. The wind had turned colder than it was that morning. The apartment was dark, no one waiting. On the table, last year's gift box still sat untouched. I opened my notebook. The page was blank. No appointments. No shopping list like all the years before. I looked at my fingers, lined with soft creases. No longer quick, but steady enough to write one thing. Just one line. In neat, deliberate strokes. This year, I'll try bringing nothing and see who still invites me. I sat there for a long time. Maybe it's time to take inventory of everything I've given and finally ask what's left for me. I used to be an accountant. I remember every dollar. But I never used that skill to count what I'd given away, not until this week. I printed the bank statements and laid them out on the old dining table, which also serves as my desk now. The maple wood is scratched in places from the time I dropped a plate last year. A red pen sat next to my tablet, a cup of coffee cold since morning. I wasn't doing this to blame anyone. I just needed to know how much of my life I'd poured into others, without ever being named. First line $200 a month for internet for 4 straight years. Since Hallie said, "We'll cover it," Mom, just keep the account in your name so it doesn't get shut off. I don't remember if I nodded or just stayed quiet. Either way, the total came to $9,600. Next home repairs the year Travis's basement flooded. I held the insurance, fronted the cost. $14,500. Then the down payment to help Hallie with her car. $6,200. Summer classes for Becca. $1,800. Emergency hospital bill when Jonah had a high fever 2 winters ago. $3,200. And that's not even counting the meals, the toys, the electric bills I quietly paid. I put it all into a simple spreadsheet, rows for each item, columns for each year. The final number, $276,800. I stared at that number for a long time, not because of how much it was, but because I'd never realized how much I could give and still survive. Not comfortably, just survive without feeling like I had anything left. My phone sat silent on the table. I pressed the button and left a voicemail for the law office I'd used for years. I need to stop all recurring transfers, and I'd like to schedule a review of my authorizations. My hand didn't shake. It was just quiet. That afternoon, I stopped by Maple Bean, a small diner that still makes toast crisp on both sides, like they did when I worked with the retired accountants circle. The tables are round in steel. The waitress still remembers I prefer peppermint tea over coffee. Silas was already there, more silver in his hair than last time, but his back still straight. We'd worked together on a few fundraisers after retirement. "Heard you're thinking about revisiting your will," he said as I sat down. I nodded. "I think it's time to redefine what my share really means." Silas didn't press. He just pulled out his notebook and handed me a page. "I usually write this down for retirees, but I think it fits you better. They didn't invite you because you weren't worthy. They didn't invite you because they assumed you'd always walk in anyway." I let out a short laugh. Maybe I did walk in too often. We sat a while longer, not saying much. Sometimes retired people know how to care without intruding. Silas ordered a second iced lemon tea. I didn't get anything else. "I used to think that if I didn't help, they'd struggle," I said, as the soft diner lights began to dim with the late afternoon. Silas didn't answer. He just nodded slowly. I left before it got completely dark. The snow hadn't started again. I walked a short stretch down Main Street. Christmas lights had already been wrapped around the lampposts. At the bank nearby, an older woman sat at the counter counting coins from a small fabric pouch. Her gloves were fraying. The plastic cup beside her had a chipped rim. She didn't look at anyone, just focused on her task. I stood and watched for a moment, not out of pity, but because I understood her. Maybe she too had once been the one who always prepared, always sacrificed, always said yes. And then one day, no one needed that anymore. No one pushed her away. They just didn't save her a seat. Back home, I opened my file cabinet. 3 savings folders. I added a 4th for myself, in any situation. I moved $12,000 into it. No one knew. No one needed to. Just me. And for the first time, I didn't wait for anyone's permission. Night fell slowly. The wind hummed lightly against the windows, but the old desk lamp kept the room warm. I switched it on, a soft yellow glow brushed across the wrinkles on my hands, and the bill with my name printed at the top. For the first time in years, I crossed my own name off the family ledger. I closed the folder and looked out at the fog-covered window. And for the first time in years, I didn't want to stay in a place where people only kept me because I was familiar. I didn't leave a goodbye note. No parting words. I just took back the keys to the cabin, the one that used to be mine, and drove off as the snow began to blanket the edge of the road. The cabin sits by Larch Pine Lake, where the pine forest runs thicker than memory. It's about a 20-minute drive from town, but I drove slowly, as if my car, too, didn't want to disturb the quiet waiting ahead. When I pushed the door open, the scent of old wood and last year's fire rose up around me. Nothing had changed, because no one had come since last winter. I wondered if Hallie remembered this place was where we celebrated Becca's first Thanksgiving. Probably not. She prefers homes with strong Wi-Fi now, and larger driveways. I lit the fireplace slowly, with old newspaper and the dry wood stacked in the crate. The fire caught with a quiet crackle, like a breath. The wooden floor creaked under my heels in a way that felt like greeting. I set my backpack on the worn-out sofa, then walked into the bedroom and pulled back the curtains. The light came in dim and soft. No one knew I was here, Not out of anger, but because, for the first time, I wanted to choose a place for myself without explanation, without asking permission. That afternoon, I walked the dirt trail toward the end-of-season farmers market. The stalls were smaller now, heaters buzzing faintly under the counters. I bought a bag of golden apples and paused at the baked goods stand. The woman beside me looked up, and I recognized her. Colleen Meyer. We went to high school together, once exchanged letters when she moved north. She'd been living alone since her husband passed. I heard once that her son tried to sell her house without asking. She took him to court and kept her cabin. Colleen saw me right away. "Mary Beth." I nodded. She held up a bag of apple pastries. "These still taste the same. And honestly, we don't need anything new at our age, do we?" We each bought a portion and walked back to the cabin. I made hot cocoa. She sat on the wooden steps, hands resting on her knees, like someone who used to garden every day. I poured the cocoa into 2 brown ceramic mugs. My hands trembled a little from the steam. Colleen took hers without a word. We sat on opposite sides of the steps, backs against the doorway, facing the forest dusted in snow. No one mentioned children. No talk of letters unsent or calls that never came. No one asked why the other had ended up in a winter cabin this far out. Maybe at a certain age, being there is enough to understand. Explanations only make the ache sharper. Colleen looked out toward the lake, now covered in a thin sheet of ice. The evening light sliced across it like a quiet blade of orange. "I kept the cabin," she said, but I couldn't keep the silence. I turned toward her. She wasn't looking at me, just speaking into the wind. "I mean, you can live alone, but the absence of footsteps, you still hear it." I knew what she meant. There are nights when the heater kicks in, a harmless sound, but it echoes like someone whispering my name in a dream. Not because it's cold, but because it's no one's voice at all. We didn't speak for a while. The forest rustled gently, like distant waves from a far-off sea. I told Colleen about the cabin, that my husband built it himself, every stone in the foundation his choice. We camped here the first summer after our wedding. Travis learned to climb trees in the little woods behind this place. Once he fell and broke his arm. I screamed in the ER while they wrapped it. I thought I'd never forgive the cabin for letting him get hurt. But I came back. Every year. Every winter. Colleen laughed. Kids never take care of the things they didn't pay for. I smiled. Then we keep them. Not to hold it against them, but to hold on to what's left of ourselves. I wasn't sure if she understood what I meant, but I didn't need her to. That sentence was for me. A quiet vow from someone who once forgot her own worth. The sun dipped lower. Colleen stood waved. No promises to see each other again, but that wasn't needed. People who survive to this age, they know how to return when it matters. I gathered the mugs, folded the blanket, secured the windows. The wind outside picked up, but the fire inside still glowed. I hung my coat on the wooden hook by the door. A moment later, there was a knock. I opened it. It was Mr. Rourke, my neighbor from across the hill. He held a wax paper-wrapped tin of oatmeal cookies. Said nothing, just nodded. I nodded back and took them. "Welcome to the cold season," he said, turning to leave. I didn't call him back, but for the first time, I didn't feel like my heart was freezing with the air. I shut the cabin door from the inside. The fire hummed. And, for the first time in a long while, I wasn't waiting for the phone to ring. I never shared the address, but on a snowy morning, I saw a familiar SUV parked at the gate of the cabin. It was the same silver-gray car, high roof, fogged windows, the kind Hallie once said was perfect for kids and dogs. The license plate was still the same one Travis chose when he got his promotion in 2018. I stood by the window, teacup still warm in my hand. I didn't move closer. I didn't step back. I just stood still. They got out after a few minutes of hesitation. Hallie first, wearing a white coat, holding a gift box wrapped in red ribbon. Travis followed, his face unreadable beneath his knit hat. Becca wore a red hoodie, carrying something round made of pine leaves and tinsel. I opened the door just wide enough to invite them in, but I didn't step outside. I only said one simple sentence. "Come in." There's coffee. No hugs. No, why are you here? Or we've been so worried. I wasn't waiting for it. And they didn't pretend. Hallie set the box of cookies on the wooden table in the center of the room. Travis looked around like he was stepping into a place that had once been his, but now had a different lock. Becca stood quietly near the small tree I'd put together. No lights, just a few paper bows and dry pine cones from the backyard. I poured the tea. Didn't ask what they wanted. Hallie spoke first. Mom, I know it was sudden. I mean, you leaving. I didn't respond. Just set the teacup in front of her. I thought maybe you just needed space. But Becca really missed you. I turned to Becca. She said nothing, but placed her handmade wreath on the table, twisted wire bits of fabric, and 2 slightly uneven paper snowflakes. I reached out, touched it gently, then nodded. Travis sat down on the wooden chair near the fireplace. It had been a long time since I'd seen him sit lower than me. He looked at me for a moment, then said softly, "You leaving made me feel lost." I sat across from him, fingers curled around my tea. The only sound was the quiet popping of the firewood. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. No one said anything when I was there, I said. I poured more tea for myself. Now I'm quiet, and that's the problem. No one argued. No one defended themselves. Hallie shifted forward. I brought gingerbread. Becca picked the flavor you like. I nodded, but didn't open the box. Didn't say thank you either. I've lived long enough to know not everything brought to your doorstep is love. The soft light from the string bulbs wrapped around the bookshelf made the room look warm, but nothing could warm the space between me and them. I picked up Becca's wreath and hung it on the bedroom door, on the same nail I'd kept from past Christmases. She watched me, didn't say a word, just pressed her lips together the way her mother does when she's trying not to cry. I sat back down. Travis glanced toward the window. Mom, are you coming back? I shook my head. I understand, he whispered. It's all so empty. I looked at him, this boy who used to fear the dark, who clung to me on Christmas night whenever ice slid off the roof. Now, he had a house, a wife, 2 kids, and still didn't know how much space a mother truly needs. I didn't blame him, didn't forgive either. I just said softly, like the wind was speaking for me, I'm not angry. I just don't live by instructions anymore. Hallie paused, as if something caught in her throat but wouldn't come out. Becca sat still, hands clasped tightly in her lap. No one said anything else, and I didn't want them to. Silence, on a thick winter day, was a complete enough answer. When they stood up, I didn't walk them to the door. I stayed where I was, hand resting on the table's edge. I heard the crunch of snow beneath their shoes, the door of the car opening then closing again. But before the SUV pulled away, I looked out the window. I saw Becca turn her head. She smiled a smile that looked just like mine when I was 11. I just didn't know if that smile was meant for me. But either way, that visit closed a door and opened a path I chose for myself. I used to be called Mom, wife, Grandma, but no one ever asked me, what do I want to be called that morning? I walked across the stone path, covered in a thin glaze of ice arms, holding a basket of cinnamon cookies and a worn book with folded corners. Snow was falling lightly, little white flakes resting on the tips of my shoes, collecting at the hem of my deep gray coat. The scarf around my neck, hand-knit, still carrying the scent of baby shampoo, was the one Becca gave me 2 years ago. Paige and Pine sat at the corner of town, where everything seemed to move slower as the year wound down. The door opened with a soft chime. Evelyn looked up from the counter. Mary Beth, she called, waving like I was someone she'd been waiting for. No one here knew how many dinners I had spent, in silence, seated at nameless tables. Here I was, simply the woman who brought cookies and a few stories. The reading nook was right by the window, where soft, winter light poured in through fogged glass. The children sat in a circle on the rug, wearing bare-eared headbands, tiny hands clutching steaming cups of cocoa. I leaned down carefully, placed the cookie bag on the wooden side table, and opened the book. The story I told that day had no princess, no dragon, just an old woman living alone in a wooden cabin deep in the forest. She used to have a big family, but over time, one by one, they forgot how to knock. The children listened with wide, quiet eyes. They didn't interrupt. They didn't ask why. They didn't need to know the woman's real name. They just needed to know she was still there lighting her fire, telling stories to the squirrels, the wind, and the pine trees. I spoke in an even tone, no theatrics, no exaggeration, just as if I were reading to myself. When the story ended, I passed out the cookies. No one asked, "Who do you live with?" or "How old are your grandkids?" They just asked, "Will you tell another one?" And I nodded as if I still had something worth holding on to. I stayed for a while after the children had gone. Evelyn came over, gently, set a business card on the table. "We're looking for someone to tell stories more regularly," she said. "I know you're not one for titles, but if you'd like, I'll print a small sign. Storyteller in residence. Mary Beth Ellison." I laughed, just a little. Not because of the title, but because for the first time, I saw my name written without any roles attached to it. That afternoon, I wandered the neighborhood. The breeze was cold, just enough to remind me that winter here doesn't coddle, but gentle enough that I didn't feel rushed. I paused outside the old flower shop. Didn't buy anything, just breathed in the scent. Back when I was someone's wife, I was too busy to notice the difference between the smell of tulips and lilies. Now I know. The same way I'm learning to tell the difference between being loved and simply being needed. When I got back to the cabin, I set the empty basket on the wooden table, took off my coat and relit the fire. The wreath Becca had made was still on the table, dry now, but not broken. I hung it on the window, not for anyone to see, but for me. So I'd remember I was still holding on to something. That evening, I opened my old notebook, the one that had followed me since I moved here. No expenses listed, no instructions left behind, just a few short lines, like footprints after a snowfall. I wrote one more. Today, a little girl said, "I'd tell stories like magic." Then I paused. Not because the words were beautiful, but because I once believed I had nothing left in me that could be called magic. Now I know some magic doesn't come from anywhere grand. It appears the moment you stop trying to be someone else. The next morning, I walked back to the bookstore, not because anyone asked me to, but because I liked the smell of fresh paper and the way people greet each other with real eyes. I signed the New Year card Evelyn had pinned by the shop door. I didn't add anything else. No grandma, no mom, no Mrs., just from Mary Beth. Nothing more. I used to be called many things. Wife, mom, grandma, the babysitter, the one who made dinner, the one who remembered every birthday, even when no one remembered mine. I never complained. I just thought maybe I was born to keep the fire going, to be the background that helped others get through the cold seasons without feeling the chill. I used to believe that love meant preparing everything quietly without being asked, like the Christmas tree that stood tall before the kids even opened their eyes, like the pie already in the oven, though no one asked for it, like the money I pulled from my retirement fund and handed to Travis when he lost his job. No invoice, no receipt, just a mother doing what mothers do. I got used to not being invited, but still showing up, bringing everything with me, the food, the gifts, my quiet presence. I thought that was normal, as if my worth was measured by what I could bring, not by whether anyone still wanted me there. And then, one day I stopped being called. Not because I died, but because I was no longer useful. I remember the last time I nodded at brunch. No protest, no frown, just a nod, as if someone had cut the string that tied me to the word family, and I just sat there still. That day, I realized some things disappear without making a sound. Like when you rise from the table and no one looks up to watch you leave. As an accountant, I always knew how to calculate, but I never used that skill to add up what I'd given to my family. Over $270,000 without a single thank you. Not out of bitterness, just the plain, quiet truth I had to face. Someone once told me kindness may not always be appreciated, but dignity should never be lost. I moved to the old cabin, not out of anger, but to begin again. I swept the porch, stacked the firewood, hung the faded curtains back in place. I sat with Colleen, a woman whose children once betrayed her, a woman who thought she'd become a shadow. But together, we lit the fire, sipped warm cocoa, and understood this simple thing: we didn't need to wait for someone else to strike the match anymore. When Travis and Hallie showed up, I wasn't angry. I just wasn't afraid of being misunderstood anymore. I didn't explain. I didn't ask to be forgiven. I simply sat and poured the tea. And when Becca handed me the little wreath she'd made herself, I held on to it. Not because she was my granddaughter, but because in her eyes, I saw the child I once was, waiting for someone to place a hand on her shoulder and say, "You are enough. You have always been enough." I tell stories to the children at Page and Pine, not because I need recognition, but because I still have something to give, this time not out of duty, but because I choose to. And I tell those stories under my own name. No titles, no roles, just Mary Beth. And if you're hearing this story, maybe from a quiet living room or on your drive home, I want to ask you something. When was the last time you did something just for you, like an old quilt that kept the whole house warm through winter? Until one day, when no one felt cold anymore, they folded it up and forgot how much they once relied on it. But what if that quilt learned to clean itself, to soak up the sun, to wrap itself around its own shoulders? Maybe then it would feel warmer than anyone ever imagined. Maybe you were once that quilt. And if this story touches your heart, think of someone who once loved you quietly. Maybe your grandmother, your mother, or the neighbor who baked you cookies that first Christmas in town. Don't wait for another winter to realize this. Some hearts only stay when you remember to hold on to them. My son gave me two choices: serve his fiancé or leave quietly. I smiled, grabbed my suitcase, and walked out. The table was set for 3, the casserole still warm, and the cranberry pie untouched, just like the seat across from me. I tightened the edge of the napkin I'd folded into a soft triangle and adjusted the fork by 1/2 inch, not because it needed it, but because it gave my hands something to do. The candle sat in the middle of the table, wick still white, its wax pristine. I had meant to light it. I just couldn't bring myself to. The house smelled of rosemary chicken, slow-cooked apple cider, and furniture polish I hadn't used since last Christmas. I'd dusted every picture frame, even the old one of our summer in Acadia. He used to love that trip. I still slept on his side of the bed, not because I missed him more on that side, but because the weight of it kept me from rolling too far toward the empty. A draft moved through the house when the clock struck 6. I checked the driveway for the 3rd time. No lights. No. Tires on gravel. I poured water into the crystal glasses anyway, set down 3 cloth napkins, and finally sat. For a minute, I thought of opening the postcard Dolores had mailed again. It was still pinned on the fridge, crooked like it was waiting to be taken seriously. I didn't have to read it to remember the words. If it ever gets too heavy, our doors are open, love. D. The casserole's cheese had begun to crust, still edible, still warm. I checked the time again, 6:43. At 6:58, I heard the front door open, without a knock. No call of Mom, just the scrape of boots on the welcome mat I'd crocheted the winter. Travis moved out. He walked in, wearing a windbreaker, no scarf, holding a phone in one hand, looking more like someone stopping by to check a meter than a son returning home. He gave me a tight smile, nodded at the table, then said, "Sorry." Traffic, and kept scrolling. Behind him came Sabrina. She didn't knock either, She swept in like smoke, fast and hard to hold. She wore one of those oversized designer coats with fake fur at the collar and a handbag that probably cost more than my car insurance. Her belly was prominent now, 6 months, maybe 7, but she moved like she didn't notice or didn't care. She looked around the house like she was appraising it for sale. Her eyes skipped the table and went straight to the ceiling. "Wow," she muttered. "Still got those popcorn tiles, huh?" I stood. "Welcome," I said, my voice soft but firm. "Dinner's ready." Travis dropped his phone on the entryway bench and followed her in. "Smells good," he said, barely glancing at the dishes. Sabrina's heels clicked on the hardwood. "You cooked all this." She sounded almost amused. "That's cute." I didn't respond, just gestured to the seats. We sat in silence for a few moments. The sound of utensils shifting, the only conversation. Travis finally cleared his throat. "So, Sabrina and I were thinking we'd stay a bit." I didn't look up. "Just a few months," he added quickly. "Till after the baby's here." I reached for the water jug. "You have your apartment." "Yeah, but it's small and noisy, and Sabrina, well, she needs a calm place. A house, you know, family energy." Sabrina laughed lightly. "And real meals, not takeout and cereal." "I thought this was just a dinner," I said. Travis rubbed his hands together. "Well, yeah, but it felt like the right time to talk about it. Talk about what I asked." He looked at Sabrina, who gave him a small nod. "You've got this whole house to yourself, and we've got a baby on the way. It just makes sense. Maybe you'd be more comfortable somewhere, quieter, like, Skyview, or one of those places, with nurses and classes and stuff. You always liked art." I stared at him. "You want me to leave my home, not leave transition, just for a while. Or, if you'd rather stay, maybe you could help out around here, just till Sabrina's back on her feet." Sabrina chuckled. "At least those homes have heating. And nurses, right?" I set my fork down slowly. Travis smiled awkwardly. "You'd be more comfortable there. This house is too much for you." For a long moment, no one spoke. I stared at the cranberry pie. It had taken me 2 hours to make. My hands had trembled halfway through, and I'd gripped the mixing spoon until my knuckles ached just to stop them. I thought of telling him that, but I didn't. He'd referred to it as hours earlier. The house, as if his name were etched into the beams, as if history and inheritance were the same thing. I looked down at my fork, then at the pie I had baked with care. "You've both made yourselves at home," I said softly. "Just don't expect me to serve." By morning, my grandmother's recipe box was gone, replaced by a shiny chrome toaster Sabrina had ordered online overnight. I noticed it the moment I walked into the kitchen. The counter where I used to stack handwritten cards and folded dishcloths now gleamed like a showroom. The new toaster still had the protective film on its buttons, and its cord stretched across the tile, like it had claimed the territory overnight. The house felt colder than usual, not from the frost outside, but from something quieter, like the walls had exhaled and decided not to take another breath. A low wind curled past the window panes. I reached into the drawer beneath the microwave, half expecting to find my tea tins, the ones labeled by hand, Earl Grey, mint chamomile. But they were gone too. In their place sat new tins, sleek uniform, unopened. I opened the pantry. Rows of jars I'd arranged over decades. Jams, herbs, rice, sacks in cloth bags were now shuffled behind snack boxes and prenatal vitamins. A sack of dried beans I'd brought back from Maine 2 summers ago was lying on the floor, torn open. I bent to pick it up when Sabrina's voice floated in from the hallway. "This place smells old, like not charming old, Just dusty. I didn't respond. She walked in behind me, belly forward, phone in hand. Do you keep mothballs in here? Or something? She added with a wrinkle of her nose. It's cedar, I said, almost a whisper. Well, it's not baby safe, just saying. She moved past me and reached into the cupboard above the stove. We're gonna need to repaint this whole kitchen. These colors are depressing. She pulled out a chipped ceramic mug, one I hadn't seen in years, my husband's. The handle had a crack. We never fixed, because he said it gave the cup character. I watched her toss it into a cardboard box labeled Donate or Toss. I'll take care of those, I said. She blinked at me like I'd just spoken a foreign language. Sure, whatever works. Travis emerged from the study, earbuds in motioning with his hand. Can we keep it down a bit? I've got back-to-back calls this morning. He disappeared again before I could reply. I stood in the hallway for a moment, not sure what to do with myself. I could hear Sabrina humming to herself as she shifted chairs and adjusted throw pillows, like auditioning them for a real estate listing. The scent of rosemary was gone. The air smelled like plastic wrap and box tape. Behind the salt tin, I found an old photo of Dolores tucked there years ago. She had one hand on her hip and the other holding a paintbrush, her face mid-laugh. I remembered her voice. Some spaces keep you small, if you let them. I hadn't understood it. Then I did now. I took out the trash after lunch. The bag was heavier than usual. A clang echoed as I lifted it, and something inside clinked against the side of the bin. I opened it. There it was, my grandmother's recipe box, upside down, its metal edges bent, cards peeked out at odd angles, corners smudged with flour cinnamon thyme. Next to it, the chipped mug. I didn't cry. I just picked them out, gently, brushing off a bit of breadcrumb that had stuck to the lid. I carried them back inside, not knowing where to put them anymore. That evening, while Sabrina napped and Travis was still talking through closed doors, I slipped on my coat and stepped outside. The wind had teeth, but I didn't care. I walked 3 blocks to Harriet's diner, my feet remembering the path, even if I didn't. The bell above the door jingled as I entered. Behind the counter, Cheryl looked up. Miss Meredith, she said, smiling. Hot cider, right? I nodded. Still remember. Of course. You and Mr. Langley always came. In this time of year, I sat at the window booth. A young couple laughed over pancakes nearby. Outside, a boy in a red jacket chased a dog through scattered leaves. After a while, Cheryl came over and placed the mug in front of me. Everything okay at home? She asked gently. I wrapped my hands around the warm ceramic. Getting there on the table, someone had left the local paper open. My eyes caught a half-page ad, bordered with snowflakes, Skyview's winter art program. Rediscover what you left behind. I stared at the words for a long time. My cider cooled. When I returned home, the house was quiet. I went upstairs, opened my nightstand drawer, and pulled out a small notepad. The pen I used dragged slightly as I wrote slow and deliberate. Mr. Leland, when Skyview picked up the woman on the line, spoke with a calm so deep it made me want to cry. Skyview Estate, good evening. How may I assist you? Her voice was honey, stirred into tea, steady, warm, unhurried. I sat straighter in my chair, tucking one leg beneath the other. The snow had started a little after sunset, a quiet brushing against the windows, like someone asking permission to enter. I wore my thick wool robe, the one with the loosened pocket seam. The lamp beside me flickered once, then glowed steady. It smelled faintly of cedar and orange peel in the room leftovers from a drawer, sachet, I hadn't replaced in years. I hesitated before speaking. "I'd like to ask about availability." I said, "Yes, ma'am," she said, not rushing me. "Are you interested in independent living or assisted independent? A private suite if possible, no shared dining." I heard my voice clearer than I expected. "We do have availability, actually. A south-facing corner unit just became open. Fireplace, garden, access. Second floor for privacy. Can I paused, looking over at the nightstand. On top of it lay the postcard. I had reread it earlier, tracing Dolores's looping signature with my thumb. Before making the call, I'd folded it carefully, pressing the creases as if it were something sacred, and tucked it into my wallet. "Could I have a brochure sent over?" I asked. "Of course," she replied. "And if you'd like, I can prepare a quote for full payment now. You'd qualify for the long-term rate." There was a silence between us, but it wasn't awkward. It felt like space had been made for something important. "Yes," I said. "Please, prepare that." I gave my email one. I hadn't used much since I retired. After she confirmed the details, I whispered, "Is it possible to move in before Thanksgiving?" There was a soft click of keyboard keys on the other end. "Yes, the suite can be ready by the 22nd. "I'd like that," I said, my voice almost inaudible. She thanked me and promised to call back the next day. To finalize paperwork, I hung up, placing the receiver gently onto the cradle. My hands rested in my lap, folded neatly, like I'd been taught in church. For a moment, I didn't move. Then I reached under the bed and slid out an old shoebox. It creaked slightly as I opened the lid. Inside were the ledgers, my husband's financial notebooks, each page scribbled with fine ink and blocky columns. I ran a hand across the top one, remembering how he used to balance the household accounts with nothing more than a calculator and quiet confidence. I flipped to the last page, scanned the numbers, then pulled out a steno pad from the drawer. I wrote down a name I hadn't said out loud in a while. Mr. Leland. He'd been our attorney since before Travis was born. The rotary phone still sat in the hallway. I dialed slowly, counting each click. The line rang twice before his assistant picked up. I left a message. "Thelma Leland. Meredith Langley would like to make an appointment tomorrow if possible." I hung up just as a knock sounded on my door. "Mom," Travis's voice muffled through the wood. "You seen my tablet?" I swear I left it in the kitchen. I opened the door a crack, the hallway light spilling in. He looked tired, pajama shirt askew, one sock missing. "Try the couch cushions," I said with a small smile. "Oh, right, thanks." He turned away without another word, already scrolling through his phone. I returned to my room. The snow had thickened outside, blanketing the garden in quiet white. My rocking chair creaked as I sat slowly, shifting back and forth. Somewhere below, Sabrina laughed at the television. I let the sound pass over me, like distant waves. My phone buzzed. A message from Dolores. "Skyview will feel like breathing again." I didn't reply. I just smiled. I reached for the sticky notes in the drawer, wrote a single word, then pressed it gently to the center of the vanity mirror, letting it hover beside my reflection, like a truth I'd finally allowed myself to say. Departure. The suitcase didn't creak when I zipped it closed. It simply whispered, "It's time." I sat on the edge of the bed for a moment after fastening the final latch, letting my hands rest lightly on the worn leather. The suitcase had traveled with me on every major chapter of my life. Our honeymoon in Oregon, the college tour with Travis, the funeral in Ohio. Now, one last journey. Not away from something, but toward myself. The sticky note still clung to the mirror. Departure, it read. I'd added a date beneath it this morning in careful inked print of 22:10 a.m. I didn't need a reminder, but I wanted one anyway, to look it in the eye. By mid-morning, I stepped onto Main Street. The sky was a low ceiling of gray, the kind that promised snow, but offered only wind. Maple leaves clogged the gutters in soft piles. I walked briskly, gloved hands folded around the strap of my purse. The town's silence, matching my own, Leland and Associates, sat quietly between a stationery store and a shuttered barber shop. The door still had the same polished brass handles. It did in the 80s, when Arthur Leland first handled our joint trust. Inside, the carpet was new, but the air held the same mix of books, dust, and varnish. Mrs. Langley. Mr. Leland greeted me in his even tone, rising from behind his desk. His glasses had slid down slightly on his nose, and he adjusted them with practiced fingers. I've taken care of everything, just as we discussed. He slid a folder toward me. Inside were the documents, property transfer, asset consolidation, and the foundation charter, the Langley Art Grant. I ran a hand across the embossed lettering. He would have liked this, I said softly. Mr. Leland nodded. He believed in doing something quietly, but meaningfully. You're honoring that, I signed, where he indicated my name, my hand, my choice. As I stood to leave, he said gently, You're doing the right thing, Meredith. I know, I replied. But it's still strange how doing the right thing can feel like turning away from everything you once called home. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. When I returned, the house felt colder than when I'd left. Not physically, but in the kind of way a once-loved room starts to pull away from you, no longer holding your name. With tenderness, I placed the suitcase upright near the door. In the kitchen, the casserole dish from Saturday night sat clean and dry on the rack. I wrapped it in a soft towel and slid it into the cupboard. It wouldn't be used again here. Sabrina stood by the fridge, holding her phone, with one hand, the other balancing a bowl of dry cereal. We're out of the prenatal vitamins, she said, without looking up. Can you pick some up next time? You're at the store? I stepped past her, pulled open the drawer with the pens and notepads, and retrieved a single envelope. My reply was quiet, even kind. You'll have to manage without me. She blinked, confused, as if I were speaking in code. Upstairs, I heard Travis's voice, rising from the study. The house is worth more than that. If she'd just signed the damn thing over. I walked to the staircase and paused. He didn't know. Not yet. Back in my bedroom, I placed the envelope on the desk and wrote in firm strokes, to be opened after my departure. Inside, I had left a short note. No anger, no accusations, just facts. The deed transfer, the art grant, the termination of shared access to accounts. A reminder of choices made and choices not made for him. As the day dimmed into early evening, I returned to the dining room. I lit the same candle that had gone untouched the night of their arrival. This time, I didn't set the table. I didn't bring out a meal. I let the flame burn, steady, small and unbothered. The house around me pulsed with low voices, distant laughter from a television show I didn't recognize, and the sound of someone opening a bag of chips. But I sat quietly beside the candle, watching it hold its place in the room, not for dinner, but for closure, and I let it burn. The chair was soft, the tea warm, and for the first time in years, I felt like I belonged in the room I was sitting in. Sunlight spilled through the garden room's wide windows, painting the hardwood floors in golden patches. Outside, the last leaves clung to bare branches, defiant and trembling in the morning breeze. Inside Skyview, everything moved slowly, intentionally, like no one was trying to outrun anything. I curled my fingers around a ceramic mug. Cinnamon and clove rose in the steam. In the corner, someone played a soft melody on the piano, and from down the hall came the faint echo of a choir rehearsal. There was no shouting, no expectations, just warmth. Dolores appeared beside me, wrapped in a shawl that looked hand-woven. She leaned in and whispered, "Told you, it would feel like breathing again." I smiled. "You were right." She pointed her chin toward a long table in the corner where a few residents were painting small canvases, chatting about the best pie crust ratios. "After brunch, I expect you there. They're doing orchids today. Is it required?" I teased. "No, but I'll guilt you into it anyway." The Thanksgiving brunch was simple, just slices of roast turkey, cranberry compote in tiny porcelain bowls, cornbread muffins, warm enough to melt butter. We didn't go around the table saying what we were thankful for. No one needed to. It was in the way we passed the sugar, the way we asked about one another's grandkids, or garden boxes, or favorite hymnals. After the meal, I strolled to the greenhouse corridor. Inside, the orchids bloomed in fragile, defiant colors: white, violet, pale yellow. I pulled a sketch pad from the tote bag Dolores had left for me on my first night. My hand moved slowly across the page. It had been years since I drew anything. The petals came out slightly crooked, but they were mine. Back at the house I'd once called home, the lights were off in the kitchen. Dishes were stacked haphazardly in the sink. A pile of unopened mail leaned against a vase someone had knocked sideways. Travis stood in the living room, holding a folder with trembling fingers. "What do you mean it's not in my name?" he snapped. Mr. Leland adjusted his coat collar. "It's been transferred. To who? The question is irrelevant now," the lawyer replied evenly. "You're no longer listed. That's impossible." Travis fumbled with the final page and stopped. There it was, my signature unmistakable. Behind him, Sabrina crossed her arms, face pinched. "I'm not raising a baby in someone else's leftover life." "Do you think I planned this?" Travis shot back. "She's trying to punish me." Mr. Leland remained unmoved. "No, she simply stopped being your plan." Travis's face crumpled into something between disbelief and shame. He dropped onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. Later that evening, Skyview's hallway was dim and calm, lit only by sconces, shaped like open books. I sat by the window with a second cup of tea. Outside snow had begun to fall, light unhurried. Dolores walked by, tapping the bulletin board with a pen. "Next week, we're making hand-tied wreaths," she said, not looking at me. "You better sign up." I raised an eyebrow. "Do I get extra points if I make 2? She smirked and disappeared into her room. When I returned to my suite, something pale lay just inside the door. A folded sheet of paper, no envelope, no name. I bent down, picked it up with care. The handwriting was uneven, pressed, uncertain. I was wrong. The handwriting was familiar, but shaky, like someone trying to spell out an apology with broken fingers. I held the envelope gently, its paper soft from having been carried too long in someone's coat pocket. No name on the outside, just my suite number, written in uneven blue ink. The snow had begun early that morning, soft flurries drifting across the Skyview windows like dancers with no music. I stood by the orchid planter, one bloom fully open, the others still curled in their green fists. I didn't open the letter right away. I set it on my desk, made a pot of chamomile, and waited until the tea bag had gone cold. When I did open it, I recognized the voice before the signature. Mom, I don't know if you'll read this or if you'll keep it. I'm not asking for anything. I just needed to write it. He wrote of late shifts at a supply warehouse, his hands blistered from lifting crates, his breath visible in the early morning cold. He wrote of a tiny room with a creaky radiator and a cot he assembled from a kit of coffee, brewed in a dented percolator, of silence. I go to meetings now. They help. Sometimes I tell people, I used to be the kind of son who thought love was a currency, that if someone stopped paying, it meant they stopped caring. But now I get it. You didn't stop loving me. You stopped letting me spend it recklessly. If I ever see you again, I don't want anything, not a place to stay, not money. Just maybe you'll look at me like a man, instead of someone who disappointed you. There was no signature, just a final line, a little lighter than the rest. I understand now. I folded the letter once, then again. I opened the drawer beside my bed, the one where I kept my husband's old letters, scientific scribbles, from conferences. A note he once left tucked into my suitcase. Call me when you miss me. I placed Travis's letter next to them carefully. I didn't read it twice. That afternoon, the Skyview Community Hall buzzed with gentle energy. The holiday decorations had gone up, hand-cut snowflakes, a paper fireplace strung with knitted stockings. Dolores arranged a table of cider and shortbread, making jokes about how she'd spike the punch if anyone under 70 weren't around. Nora, the youngest of the Skyview art students, stood by her easel, anxiously twisting the hem of her sweater. She had soft brown curls and freckles that reminded me of someone I used to be. I saved this one for you, she said as I approached. Her painting was a watercolor, soft blues and grays, a lone orchid in the corner, a faint outline of a window behind it. The title, handwritten in the corner, Still Orchid. You painted this for me, I asked. She nodded. You don't look like someone who left, she said quietly. You look like someone who began again. I couldn't find the words for a moment. I simply reached out and squeezed her hand. Later, when the mini exhibition began, Dolores nudged me toward the podium. Go on, she said. They're waiting. I stepped forward, not as someone's wife or mother, but as Ms. Langley, artist, mentor, just me. The faces looking back were kind, expectant, a few familiar, a few brand new. Nora stood at the front, her eyes wide. I used to think that starting over meant going back to who I was, I said, but it doesn't. It means becoming who you were meant to be, after everything else has stripped you bare. I looked down at Nora, then back at the room. This part is mine. The applause was soft, warm enough. Later that evening, I walked to the Skyview garden. The ground was cold, but not frozen. I knelt down slowly, pressing my hand into the soil until it gave just enough. I planted a single orchid, its stem fragile but rooted. Behind me, Nora appeared quietly. She didn't say anything. She just reached for my hand, held it as I stood. The air smelled of snow and pine. Somewhere in the distance, carolers were warming up. And in the window of my room, the orchid I had sketched on Thanksgiving stood in full bloom, not alone, just beginning. Somewhere between silence and snow, I found the quiet kind of strength that doesn't ask to be seen, but holds you steady, just the same. I used to think love meant always saying yes, always giving, always staying. But I've learned, if you forget to honor yourself, even those you love most may forget to honor you too, like an old armchair in the corner of a room, once the center of comfort, now overlooked. Until one day, someone decides to sit and finally understand what it's held up all these years. If this story touched something in you, maybe take a moment to reach out to someone who's always been there, even in the quiet. Sometimes, the warmest kind of love is the one that finally turns inward.